So this is Bam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Deane Benninghoven. You're a certified hypnotherapist and a hypnosis instructor. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Phantom. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm living
Good.
in this great state of New Hampshire, and
All right.
we're having a kind of overcast day, but it's all good. The leaves are turning, so everything's fine.
Well, it's a beautiful fall day here in Tacoma, Washington. That's where I'm at.
Awesome. So we always like to start the podcast with a couple questions we ask every guest. One of the things we found that's interesting, what we like to ask is, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Oh, that's a great question. What motivates me is learning and teaching about hypnosis, doing hypnosis with my clients. You know, hypnosis is a willing uh, co-creation. So if a person isn't willing to do the hypnosis with me, to take that ride with me, then we're going to be limited in how much success we can have. So I see my role as a hypnotist as being a guide, a coach, a teacher, and a cheerleader. The good news is with the hypnosis, all of us, have this hypnotic state as a part of our everyday life experience. Really, what I'm doing is I'm showing and teaching those clients how they can use their own hypnotic state to create powerful change. I think that was question one. What was question two?
Well, it's basically like what you why you do what you do,
Mm,
and what motivates you, but it might be in the same space.
yeah.
It's just
Well, I'm motivated because hypnosis changed my life. A little over 20 years ago, I was in a serious car accident, and I broke a bone in my neck,
mm,
and it was tremendously painful. That pain and the uh, recovery process was very slow. 20 years ago was right in that time frame when they would back a truck full of opioids up to your door and tell you to help
oh
yourself.
yeah,
And that's not really a recipe for success.
no,
And when I was finally realized it was time to step away from that, um, I was left with a lot of pain, and I couldn't work. I felt really stuck, really frustrated, and I didn't know how I was going to go on. And I happened to read an article about them doing neck surgeries on people in Belgium using only hypnosis and no other kind of anesthetic. And I thought, well, if they can do that, maybe I can do something with my neck.
mm,
So I called around my local hypnotist, but I didn't really have any money to pay somebody like me. So I ended up going to the library. I got all the books I could find about hypnosis and started teaching myself. And it took me about 4 months or so of working by myself to be able to manage that uh, pain element. And then from there, it sort of rippled outwards to working on emotional stuff and anxiety and things like that. I had a lot of trauma early on in my life that really fed into and affected how I responded to the car accident, if that makes sense.
that makes a lot of sense. But maybe we got to get to the core of like what is hypnosis so people can
Oh,
understand it, because I understand like you're using it in this in like maybe a non-conventional way or a way that I hadn't heard of to
mm-hmm,
solve like a pain in your neck
mm-hmm,
or that kind of pain management
right.
instead of using opiates. But the whole concept of hypnosis, maybe people need to have a like a primer on it.
Sure, sure. Well, this is a really, really critical aspect because many people still misunderstand what hypnosis is. And that's a huge part of my mission. One of the reasons I'm here today is I really want people to understand that you already have experienced hypnosis. Every single day, we pass through these phases of hypnosis. So when you're daydreaming and you get
Mhm.
that sense like, oh, you're dumped back into your body when you come back to the room and you think, oh, was I drooling? Is somebody looking at me? That's a hypnotic state. It's a light hypnotic state, but it's a hypnotic state. When you're driving the car and you get where you're going and you realize, oh, that was fast, or I missed my exit. Well, that's a pretty profound hypnotic state. And driving the car is one of those situations where we tend to go into hypnosis very, very readily because
It's like
the body knows what it's doing. The conscious mind is just focused enough on the road, and that sets up an ideal situation to go into hypnosis. And in fact, The words that I use to bring people into hypnosis, Phantom, those words are called the induction. The
Mm.
only tools that I have are my words, my voice, and my client's imagination. So when you're in the car and you're driving along and you go into those hypnotic states, um, that's exactly the state that we want to get you into. Um, as you're falling asleep at night, you pass through what's called the hypnagogic state. When you wake up in the morning, you're in the hypnopompic state. So all of these are just examples of your day-to-day hypnotic
Yeah,
experiences.
day to day, everybody has experienced.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, as a musician, I would like to point out, well, there's this thing of like we call it like get in the zone. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
like if I'm playing like jazz fusion or
Oh,
experimental music on stage, and then people ask me like, well, what were you doing? It's like once I get into that groove, I might if somebody shows me a film of what I was doing, I have no idea that I was doing that. Right.
right,
I
right.
just get into this zone, and it's like I'm just like one with the music. And it's because that 10,000 hours of practice,
Hmm.
physical practicing muscle memory. But then I'm recalling in what I play stuff that's in my subconscious. I might
Right.
pull out a show tune. I might pull out something. And I didn't know I was going to do that, but it's like
Hmm.
there.
But
And
you
then,
reference those things.
yeah, the things just come
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. You've spent the time learning muscle memory, how to do that, and that allows you to shift into that flow state. And the flow state is also a hypnotic state.
Mm,
I use hypnosis all day long, not just on my clients, but on myself. When I'm working with a client, I'm in a hypnotic flow state. The thing that's so cool about those hypnotic flow states is those belong to you, and you can toggle back and forth very, very easily with some practice
mm.
how to be in the flow state, how to come back out, go back into the flow state. And so when I'm doing my sessions, man, I do 2 to 2.5 hour long sessions with clients, and that time just blows right by because I'm in the flow. I don't use scripts or I don't really ever know what's going to happen when that client walks in the door. I listen, we have a little conversation before, and then when it's time for me to do my part, I just flow into it and they're
Well, you
flowing
got
into it.
yeah, you got that practice 10,000 hours,
Hmm.
like you did the research.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
and you so there's a lot of things like I always tell people like when they're artists is like you kinda have to trust yourself,
Hmm.
and the anxiety comes in where you suddenly get these moments where you don't trust your own capabilities.
Right,
Then you get
right.
these dry spells and it's like, "Well, I can't come up with anything."
Hmm.
If I've tended not to have that because
Hmm.
I've always kinda just hit the record button and just go. Right,
Right,
and
right.
then whether it was not that I don't plan some idea, I might have something humming in my head or some reference or something, but it's like a lot of times if you just, give yourself some grace and say
Hmm.
that, "Yeah,
Hmm.
I got this," like, I've seen writers do it too, it's like they just jump into it. They have an outline, they might have a world building thing they built, but then when they get into it's like they're, like, giving themselves some freedom to, like, just go off. They
Right,
see
right.
that, it's a happy accident and it comes back, it's like, "Oh, that actually might change the direction of what I was doing."
Yeah.
There's a nugget in here that's better than what I planned.
I make recordings for my clients, depending on the session, but always on the first session. And sometimes I go back and I listen to a few minutes of that recording. I'm like, wow, this guy's great, right? Because it's just that flow. And the thing I really like about hypnosis is it is kind of like playing jazz music or something where it's not just me, it's both of us, and we're both
Yeah,
kind of in that zone. There's a give and take and a
like
flow,
a
and
whole band. Like when you have a band, there's like nonverbal communication
mhm, yeah,
and there's verbal
exactly.
communication. So the stuff when I could look at the bass player, he kind of knows what I mean. If I give him
Yeah,
that, and the
yeah.
drummer looks at me and I'm like, yeah, he's waiting for me to jump into the solo or something. Yeah, there's stuff that we kind of can do without saying anything.
Mhm,
You can kind of
exactly.
even hear it. Sometimes you can just hear it. Like here's the cue. Get to hear this, then you know you're gonna do that. So
Right.
yeah, it's this stuff that they once you have this collaborative issue, where you're actually, with a one-on-one, or if I don't know if you do group, but that one-on-one gives you that potential to that communication people have. It's like that vibe. You
Yeah,
get the
yeah,
vibe in the room, and if you understand how to read it.
yeah, and I do one-on-one, I do small groups, and I do larger groups. I do workshops at my space here. I've got a classroom kind of an area, so I teach workshops on different aspects of hypnosis that people are interested in, and those are you can find those through the website, but we're working on putting all that together right now. It's kind of new for me to have this space and expand into more group work. I've really just been focused the last several years on the single client and very small couples and things like that type situations.
That's interesting because in terms of like what hypnosis can be used for, it's like you maybe you have like microcosm, like individual issues, and then you have people that have maybe like macrocosm issues within group structures. Like if you have a workplace, and
Sure.
maybe they're having like a group issue, like at a macrocosm level rather than at the microcosm level.
Well, one of the things that I've discovered is that anxiety is such a macro issue, right? So many people struggle with anxiety, and the anxious response starts in your subconscious mind. It starts below the level of your conscious awareness. If it was conscious phantom, you would control it. But as we know, if you've ever been anxious, man, that's hard to control. I used to be a guy who'd get hauled away to the emergency room a few times a year with panic attacks and anxiety and terrible, terrible anxiety. And, they give you a shot or a pill, and they tell you, you're just having a panic attack. Well, if you're a person who suffered through that, there's no just about it. You literally feel like you're dying.
It feels like you're it's like totally unsafe. You're running into like the wolves at the door.
Right, right. And, all of that is how our subconscious mind protects us. That's one of the main jobs of the subconscious mind. It's your autonomic nervous system. So that's your heart rate, your breathing, digestion, blood flow, all of that stuff. One of the groups of people that I work with is people who have IBS, because IBS is one of those problems that's really, really affected by things like anxiety.
Yeah.
It causes anxiety, and then it creates this kind of feedback loop.
Feedback loop, it's like keeps on going in a circle, like it causes it, but then it is the cause.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so it's important to know that your subconscious mind is always going to be like an overprotective parent. And I've seen people's subconscious minds make them physically sick, have all kinds of health problems. And it's because the subconscious mind is using your physical health as a way to pull you back from the brink in its worldview, and keep you from getting into a situation that subconsciously you see as very, very dangerous.
Yeah, and in the modern world, like the wolf at the door could be a trigger word, or like a vision or visual that you see that triggers something, and then boom, you're in it. So you're just like I get, I've understood is like I try to use like art therapy as like music as a catharsis. So if anything I've gone through is kind of really boiling up, I kind of put it into the piano. I put it into the guitar, I put it into bass guitar, I put it into whatever instrument I'm playing, like a sax or whatever. And I find it like once I get through that and I've kind of addressed it, I've kind of worked it through it, like looking glass, and I've actually gone into the depths of it and tried to put it out. And writers will do it too, but you still have to talk to people. Sure. But if you find a way to do like the art therapy of being a creative, if it's that person, like, but if you don't have that, some people feel they don't have it. But I think everybody's creative. I think everybody does something, but they might minimize it because they think they have to be Da Vinci.
Right. Yeah.
It's William Blake, and like, no, you don't.
Yeah. It's so therapeutic, and you're absolutely right. When you can channel that feeling into something, lots of us have had the experience of being upset, angry, or anxious, and you get in the car and you go for a drive. And, if you're angry or upset, after a few minutes, you're still thinking about that thing that really got you going, but the emotional part gets quiet. And that's a byproduct of going into even the very lightest hypnotic states. Like you
just mentioned, driving kind of hypnotic. So if you do the driving, it would like a walk in the woods, because they say, like, there's a famous poet is that nature is the cathedral.
Right.
So if I go walk in the pines, like the New England pines, like on Merrimack River Trail, I go walk that. Right. That can get rid of a lot of stress. Like if my boss is giving me a hassle, like, you didn't get the deadline. Like, wait, I'm going to walk away, take a half-hour walk in the pines.
Right.
Come back. Then I redirect instead of getting all freaked out. about the
Hmm.
fact that you say, "Oh, you missed the deadline." It's like, well, let's kind of give myself a little space and then come back to it instead of being so frenetic about it.
Right. Well, you know, visual artists, they're constantly getting that perspective, right? Step back and look at the work from a different perspective. That's what a walk in the woods, that's what, you know, that's how I use hypnosis in a lot of senses, going into these light trance states to think about things. You know, the subconscious is also the creative part of your mind.
Hmm.
Subconscious is 90 to 95% of that unit that we call our brain. The electrical impulses that it runs off of are going to the subconscious mind.
Yeah, there's a lot going on because like
Hmm.
I was like waking dreams, you feel like if you get in this kind of the idea of the flow state is like
Hmm.
sometimes it just feels like you're in a dream, but you're awake
Yeah.
and things that just happen. And in terms of like the creativity, I've talked to painters and photographers and anybody who's like an artist, and
Hmm. Hmm.
they tend to access that. And this idea, like your Victorians get about the muse, but the
Right.
muse is kind of external and external, I mean internal. Like
Right.
this stuff that's like my subconscious, and there's stuff that's outside. And I might
Right.
have seen something or heard somebody say something or seen something that triggers something, but it's also in that's external, but there's internal stuff that's going on in my subconscious mind that triggers that too.
Right. Right. Yeah. The subconscious is always there and learning and growing. The thing that I like people to understand about how the subconscious mind works is, you know, if you picture your subconscious mind here and your conscious mind over here, the conscious mind for what I do is just kind of the lens that tells your subconscious how it's going to respond to any given situation. But a way to think about it is in between the conscious and the subconscious mind, there's this other really important part called the critical factor or the critical faculty of the mind. And that is a guard that's there to protect your subconscious mind and keep all of your patterns of thought just the way they are today.
Hmm.
Most of us acquired all these patterns of thought from the time we're born to today. But from the very early part of life, but from the time you're born to somewhere between 7 to 10, that guardian part is not there yet. So everything that happens early on in your life just goes in and forms these patterns. And then this guardian part comes online about 7 to 10. And the thing that's really fascinating about it, Phantom, is it only lets information into your subconscious mind that agrees with what you already believe.
Oh,
So
put you in a box.
yeah, so you're kind of in a box that way. And that's the entire thing about hypnosis. Why it works and how it works is uh, when you're in hypnotic states, driving the car or daydreaming, that guard part goes offline.
Oh,
So
so
you're
you can
able to access
open it up a little bit, or
the
you can open it
operating
all.
system. Yeah.
Can you
You
open
act
it all the way, or you like this little pieces of it open up over time, or is it how does it happen? Does it happen in stages?
Well, that's a really, really interesting question. It's always kind of opening and closing, I guess, during the normal flow of your day, right? You're daydreaming, it's open. The conscious mind and the subconscious mind in that moment are communicating about what's just happened over the last few hours. What within what's happened over the last few hours is going to go in my forever storage because the subconscious mind is forever storage. Uh, and what things can I forget about? Like, where did I leave my car keys? Right? Doesn't really make sense to remember forever where you just put your car keys because you know you're going to move them again. There's a certain kind of weird logic to the way this works. But when you're in hypnotic states, um, that tends to be a much deeper uh, state of hypnosis. And that's just through suggestion. So even in the very, very lightest states of hypnosis, you're more suggestible than you are at any other time. So once I talk you to that place where you're in a light hypnotic state, I just use words like now go deeper. And your subconscious mind seems to understand that that's a metaphor. Obviously, I don't mean go deeper into the chair. It understands because the
Yeah,
subconscious speaks the language of metaphor. It doesn't speak English or French or any other language. It speaks in symbols and metaphors and things like that. So when you say deeper,
you don't
suddenly,
understand.
as the client, you feel, oh, I'm kind of just going deeper into it, more of everything I'm experiencing, heaviness or lightness, like my body goes to sleep, whatever it is. And, if your subconscious mind were to continue going forward in a normal setting, like at night, well, forward would mean go to sleep. I don't
Mhm.
want you to go to sleep in my office. That's an expensive nap. I want you to go down deeper and get into that state. And then that subconscious mind is very, very open, receptive, and ready for me to talk you and walk you through, guide you through a series of kind of exercises that are sometimes designed on the fly for you based on what your problem is.
Mhm. So this is where you could actually kind of do some reframing, or
Hmm.
if you're in that box and you keep on doing the same thing, because up to age 7, 10, you built that box.
Right,
But now
right,
you want to kind of, well, that box isn't really useful now at age 45 or 50.
right.
And so you could start to create a permission structure to get outside of that box.
Exactly. Exactly. The thing that's really important to know is how the mind works. If you remember Pavlov and his dog from school, right? Well, he had a dog. He'd ring a bell and he'd give the dog a piece of meat. So that's a stimuli: bell, response, meat,
Mhm.
or response. The dog would salivate, and the reward was he got a treat. What he learned by repetition, and that's what these patterns are. They're just repeated ways of thinking, being, or doing things, that you could take away the reward and you would still have the response to the stimuli. So for a lot
Mhm.
of us, like with anxiety, there may have been times in our lives where we felt as young kids uncomfortable, unsafe, awkward, whatever it is. And the reward was, if you feel like you're on high alert, you feel like you're ready for whatever's coming. But you were never under any physical threat anyway. But that's just the brain way our brains are wired to work. Um, you can take away any reward that could have come from being on high alert, but once that pattern is wired in, if you're in a situation like a group of people, or having to talk to somebody new, or what I hear a lot is having to go to the grocery store. Sometimes it really
Stress.
ramps up
Yeah,
that
it's too
old
stressful.
response. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
such
there's
a bad
no,
experience nowadays.
yeah, yeah. And there's no real reward. It's just that this pattern is established. But what's important to know is it's just a pattern. I always say nothing less, but also nothing more. And you can absolutely change patterns with
So you won't
your
get triggered,
subconscious mind.
because sometimes it's like, the example of, like, the driver that gets, like, road rage. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you're like, well, what's triggering that? Well, there's probably this, somebody's just like, they reach this point and you had no idea they reached a point, and then you just cut them off, and then suddenly that point is triggered. And then you're at it, it's like, well, it's not maybe that particular action, but everything up to that point, and then you just pushed it
Right,
without
right.
knowing. And you
Eh,
don't, it's not your responsibility, but, like, then suddenly they're in it.
right. And you happen to be the one who's in front of them when they're
Yeah,
in it, right? And
yeah.
that anger has been kind of bubbling up probably for decades, right? Every time we get angry, we're responding to something that feels unfair, right?
Mhm.
That's our response. And when you think about the mind and the way the mind works, if I always tell this story, if I had a little monkey on two little monkeys in front of me here, and I always gave one over here 10 grapes, but I only give this one a half a grape. Eventually, this half a grape is, guys, he's going to have to get ramped up and amped up and go take care of this guy and get some of those grapes,
The
right?
other one, yeah.
Um, and at the end of the day, that's the kind of world our brains are wired for.
Mm.
We lived for millions of years in hunter-gatherer groups, and the world was pretty simple. You're doing your thing, hunting and gathering. You got your whole little tribe there, and then there's a bear, right? And now everybody is in maximum danger. And so, what our brains do in that moment is your subconscious mind opens like a pupil in a dark room, and it sucks up all the information in that moment. Some things that you're conscious of, like where you are, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, things like that, those are things you might be consciously aware of. But those are what we call triggers. Now, in that same moment, your brain has also soaked up 1,000 things that are only you were only ever aware of subconsciously. And those things can be just as powerful a trigger as the things that you're aware of. And that's what happens when people suddenly click into anxious. Don't know why it's happening, but I know it's there. And of
Mhm.
course, when things like that start happening and you start feeling out of control, well, now feeling anxious becomes something that makes you anxious. And now you're in this awful cycle that so many people can get trapped in.
Yeah, that
Um,
loop.
the important thing is to be able to stop that and redirect your mind. And that's what, when I work with people, and most of the people I see, Phantom, are referrals from doctors and therapists and people like that. And they're people who've been doing therapy for many, many years. And it's really, really helped. But they're still falling into these old patterns. And so then their doctor or therapist would send them to me, and I'd be part of that mental health team. And we're going to work on the pattern itself. So everything I do is very, very directed. I usually sit with clients 3 to 5 times to resolve things like anxiety, um, phobias, and negative reactions of all kinds. But typically we can get in and get out. That's what we want to do. That's what we want hypnosis to be. It's not talk therapy. Get
Mhm.
in, target it, get in, get out.
Targeted, trying to find that trigger.
Hmm.
Right?
And yeah, and the other thing that's interesting about it is, when we have these events that cause the initial response, it's like getting a splinter that you can't get out.
Mhm.
And every time, if you had a splinter like that, every time you brush up against something, it hurts just as bad as when you first got it, right?
Yeah,
So hypnosis is a way to go in and take that splinter out.
take it
We
out,
don't need
actually
to,
solve it. Yeah,
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 we don't need to relive all the past trauma and everything. Obviously, something happened. You've got the symptom. So this is just take that splinter out. And then we want to look at that splinter under a microscope. And when you do, what you see is, oh, that's me, the person that I was when I got that response, when I first picked it up. So, same age, same worldview, same mindset. And that's why falling into these old patterns can be so frustrating, because this isn't who I am today, right?
yeah.
But when I get mad and act like a child, well, in reality, you are going all the way back to
True.
who you were, that child you were, when that response had a reward attached to it, if that
Well, that
makes
makes
sense.
sense that like your type of theory is again to root cause
Hmm.
and like
Hmm.
pulling the thorn out rather
Right.
than giving somebody a pain reliever with the thorn still in there.
Right, right. If the thorn is still in there, you're eventually going to brush up against something that elicits that old response again, right?
Yeah.
So I do lots of single sessions for people who have, you know, situational anxiety, and in those situations, we use a what's called a hypnotic anchor. So we bring them into a trance state, have them connect with a very good memory. Your memories are stored in your subconscious mind. The feelings that go with those memories are there too. We borrow a good feeling, and then we connect it to a physical anchor. For most people, it's rubbing their fingers together or something
Oh,
along
so
those lines.
physical pattern.
So
Yeah.
that, yeah, so that when you brush up against those things, for this is first session stuff. When you brush up against those triggers, you rub your fingers together and you bring your mind away from what feels bad and towards something that feels good. So we're connecting with that good memory feeling. We blow it up, we make it really big, really strong, and then we move through another few exercises where we're imagining in a hypnotic state a future where you're brushing up against those triggers in a calm way. And then you use the anchor again. So throughout that one session, we're reinforcing this idea that when I do this, I become calm. Our brains actually really like things that make us feel better when we feel bad, right? That's how people
Yeah.
get in
It
trouble with
makes a lot of
drugs and alcohol and stuff. So,
because you're giving them you kind of teaching your brain the rigor that a musician or an athlete goes through their training. Part of
right.
their like in my rehearsals, like I'm going through what's going to happen at the show, so I know how to handle it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So
Repetition is the mother of learning, right?
yeah,
These old responses that we have, anxious or mad or whatever they are, those were ingrained because they were repeated over and over and over again. So I tell people, you may use your anchor 10,000 times the first few days, that's fine. That's 10,000 opportunities for you to wire a new response to an old trigger.
Reprogram it. Well, your
Yeah.
brain's like the ultimate computer. Man, I deal
Yeah.
with computers, but it's like, yeah, it's like if you can reprogram, then it's new instructions.
Right. Right.
Systems are kind of trying to model off a brain, but we're never fully there.
Right.
We still just 0-1, no matter what they say.
Right.
It's 0-1, yes, no. It
Right.
gets, it seems like it's more sophisticated, but pretty much that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you start thinking about your mind that way. So many times we think, well, this is how I am, right? It's hard to change. And, for so many of the ways that we try to change, you have to realize that you're fighting against the way the brain itself is wired, right? It's designed so you don't change those patterns. If cars were outlawed tomorrow, hopefully, all of us are still going to look both ways before we cross the street, right? That's a hardwired response now. And if you live somewhere where cars can't go, and you walk across the street and you catch yourself looking both ways, why do I do that? There's no cars here.
You don't need it anymore.
Yeah, I don't need it. What's interesting with these kind of negative patterns is once you've brushed up against enough situations, it can take a month, it can take a year of just living your life, not coming back for sessions all the time. But once you start brushing up against situations where the old trigger would have been triggered and it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen, your brain will start to break up that old pattern, reabsorb the neural networks that support that pattern, because our brains are incredibly efficient. They don't waste neural networks. Yeah.
Rewrites it with the new logic.
Yeah, exactly. The new reality, the new truth. Yeah, maybe that pattern did make sense when you were 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 or whatever, but it doesn't make sense now. And that's
we talk about agile software development where we go iterative development. So like we didn't know something yesterday,
right?
So we were in this pattern, but now today that doesn't make sense. So we'll rewrite the code to handle this the system that we didn't know this, but now we do. So now we're not going to keep on doing that same thing. Could we just iterate to version 1.11?
Yes.
Or 130 or 114, and so suddenly that code is not there, or it doesn't handle that air condition doesn't need to go this way, it goes a different way.
Right. And that's exactly it. With our brain, because it's organic, it reabsorbs those old patterns and starts to create new patterns. If you ever spoke a language, or maybe for you played an instrument, right? And then you didn't touch it for 20 years. Well, you're a musician, so you could probably go back to it and pick it up. But if I used to play an instrument and I stop and I don't go back to it for 20 years, well, it's going to be really hard for me to pick up where I left off. These patterns are no different. And that's a really important thing to know. We always think about it with things like maps that we have in our mind or languages that we used to speak. But it's important to know that exactly the same thing can happen with patterns of behavior. As soon as our brains learn, that's not necessary. I can react and be calm and still be okay.
So you're going to, like, if you're, post-traumatic stress, or you have this situation where you can resolve trauma without reliving the trauma from what you're saying. Like you could go through that kind of scenario where you don't have to repeat that loop.
Yes, I do lots of PTSD. That's a little bit different than, like, I do early childhood trauma and I do PTSD. Those are my really big things. I do a little smoking. I do a little weight loss, but really the main thing I'm known for is working with these anxious responses. Now, whenever we have something that's traumatic, and trauma is a scale, it's a big scale, everywhere from kind of like little t trauma. I had a client once who made a mistake in the school play. And when he made this mistake, everybody laughed at him and they kind of teased him for the rest of the year. And by the end of that year, he felt terrible about himself. But the following school year, his parents shifted him into a new class, or new school rather. And he picked up and went on middle school, high school, college. He got a degree, he got a job. But that experience with the school play planted a seed. Now he got the job that he really wanted, And his boss said, fill out this paperwork and then come into the next room. And everybody's there. You get to stand up and introduce yourself. Well, he immediately started to sweat and shake, and he ran to the bathroom and he threw up, and he thought, oh my gosh, I've got food poisoning or something. And he went home. The next day he made it to the park. He felt fine when he left. The next day he made it to the parking lot. Oh, I'm sick. Went home. The next day, by the time he got dressed at home, I'm sick. This isn't going to work. So he ended up moving back in with his folks. His folks did what a lot of parents would do. They want to take care of everything so that you're having time to feel better, so you're not feeling triggered. But that just helped him pull back further and further and further, so that by the time I met him, he hadn't gone out of the house for almost 2 years.
Yeah, with the
We,
extreme.
we did our first 2 sessions online. For me, the first session is about this thing, making an anchor to help you. He liked that. The second session is usually where we're trying to get in and start resolving this root cause stuff. Third session, and we did that. That's when he remembered the school play. He didn't have a conscious memory of that or how that might be affecting this. Third session, he couldn't wait to come in and talk to me because he was really mad. Not at me, at his subconscious mind. He said, how could my subconscious mind F me over that way? He didn't say F. He was really mad.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly how it's meant to work. It protected you from something.
Trying to keep them safe.
Yeah.
I think in that situation is dangerous because of what happened was it was dangerous to his ego, maybe because they humiliated him because they're laughing at him.
Right.
That feels like an attack.
Yeah. And that physical illness was what his subconscious mind was able to do and did do to keep him from going in that room. It's amazing how incredibly powerful. Of course, our bodies.
Yeah, it was that link to the physical you said.
Yeah.
It's like that caused a physical reaction in his body, reacting with like number 4. It's like, so you're going to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep him out of this because I'm going to make the body do something so he's not in this scenario anymore.
Right. And I've seen people who lost the ability to swallow, who had severe physical pain. And I don't want to say it was all caused just by the subconscious mind. It was the response of the subconscious mind using the body as a tool to keep you, from its perspective, out of harm's way. So that's just an example of little t trauma. But whenever we have these traumatic events like PTSD, we become overly associated with the trauma. That means it's always in the forefront of our minds. Right? Because that's how our subconscious mind keeps us from ever falling in that situation again. Right? So if you've ever played video games, you think first person versus third person, right? Overly associated is first person. So when we're working together, we never want to think about, picture, or imagine that trauma from a first person perspective. We need to pull back, because pulled back is the reality of where you are now. And there's a real power that comes just from a starting point of, well, let's look at that over the timeline of your life, the reality of it. Because when you have PTSD, your brain is telling you you're in that situation all the time. And hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah, you don't want to be replaying that traumatic scenario, because it could be a really violent car accident. It could be something from wartime.
Yeah.
A really bad bullying incident or an assault.
Yeah, all of that. Firefighters, lots of people, veterans, have had those kinds of post-traumatic stress-inducing events. So anywhere on that spectrum, from little t to big T traumas. I have somebody.
I didn't think to mention, if you're an emergency worker, like an ambulance, like ER firefighter. Do they have it as their normal process to have therapy for the people in those jobs so that they kind of decompress from getting hit with that 24/7?
Well, I can't speak to how it is everywhere, but I know in Tacoma, where I live, Washington State, there is more of an emphasis on it now. I think still within the culture itself, there's that sort of resistance, right? I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't need anything from anybody. And, that's, it's
defense mechanism.
It's a defense. Yeah, it's a defense. But of course, people don't want to be perceived as weak, but it's not really a weakness. This is your brain wired to do this for millions of
Seems like you need
years.
that resource, because if you're in that space where you're constantly just exposed to traumatic scenarios, that visually in it, feeling it, hearing it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's your job, and you might feel like I got to be strong, so I'm going to kind of lock it away in a box.
It does carry, unfortunately, some of that same stigma that any kind of mental health situation would carry in a group where you're depending on the person next to you with your life, right? When really, if that person could get the help they need, they could be much more present and able to function with clear in clarity rather than vision clouded by this old situation from the past.
Yeah, there's a thing that you think that makes you weak actually makes you stronger.
Oh, absolutely.
But that
Absolutely.
tends to be like maybe at the societal level, like talking about something isn't making you weak because you admit something. But
Right.
the whole idea like vulnerability.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When you're an artist, like vulnerability is our secret sauce.
Right.
And that's what we kind of live in. It's like it's our coin. That's what we have to work with, because that's our wheelhouse. But in other places that might, like if you make that your wheelhouse, people are like, I don't know about this guy. He's telling he's talking too much.
I struggled for over 40 years with trying to be that. Like that's how I am. I'm an old guy. I was brought up in that era where, boys don't cry, you don't talk about how you feel and all of that stuff. I had a lot of physical, emotional, sexual abuse growing up, and I tried to keep all that stuff inside and be that guy. And it nearly destroyed me. When this accident happened, it just popped the lid off of all of that stuff. And suddenly I was in enforced vulnerability, right? When you have a neck injury like that and you can't really move around, you don't feel like you can, and you're having to depend on people all of a sudden, that'll really take you down that dark rabbit hole.
Exposes that, like, oh, and now I've been exposed to my the weakest point in my life. Like I'm a cancer survivor. Age 27, had a sarcoma on my back and a couple of surgeries, and I was actually forced to be in a bed for like 3-4 months with like an open wound being tended to by a nurse every day. So that was a mountain biker. I'm a guy who likes to go coming down Mount Killington, Mount Snow, 40 miles an hour. And suddenly I'm like, I can't go anywhere. I can't move. I got to stay in this bed. And it was like 27 years old. I'm like, wow. Right. You think you're indestructible at 27. That's why I was a mountain biking coming down hills at 45 miles an hour. And then that happens and you're like, changed my perspective big time.
Sure. And that vulnerability, it is a resource. And to be able to be vulnerable in this world takes a tremendous amount of strength. So I work with firefighters, police officers, veterans, and I give discounts for all those frontline people, nurses and ambulance paramedics and all of those guys and women. And I've had clients from all those different elements of our society. Yeah.
But what are some like uncommon applications that people like that seems like an obvious choice that maybe people didn't think about it, but other like uncommon applications for hypnosis that people maybe wouldn't have thought about?
Well, pain management is one. Like a lot of people think smoking cessation, maybe fears and phobias. That's a pretty straightforward thing. Pain management is actually surprisingly straightforward. Not easy, but straightforward with hypnosis, because pain, there is no perception of pain until that pain signal goes from the place where you're feeling it to the brain and back again. It's that relay. So with hypnosis, because it's the autonomic nervous system, it's that part of you that is feeling the pain, feeling or interpreting that signal, you can stop that signal as it reaches the brain and end that constant relay. It takes practice on the part of the client, but you can, I do that every single morning. That's how I wake up and start my day, because even though I feel better and I'm able to move, I do still struggle with chronic pain every single day.
Mhm.
And hypnosis, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a proponent of hypnosis and using hypnosis, because it's absolutely, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know if I would have been able to continue with my life where I was at when I first read that article.
that sounds well. That's very interesting because, like me, I suffer from rheumatoid arthritis,
Mm, mhm,
and
mhm.
I do some things based on what some holistic doctors told me about, but nobody ever mentioned what you're talking about as a
Well,
potential like solution to that. That's
and,
interesting.
that's one of the things. That's why one of the reasons I'm happy to talk to you today, because that's, like I say, it's not simple, but it's straightforward.
Hmm.
Uh, I just explained, everybody has had this experience, right? All of a sudden, you find there's a bruise on your leg or your arm, or you're leaking blood. What? What happened? Where'd that come from?
Yeah,
Your brain knows how to ignore that
yeah.
input. That's the starting point,
That's
right?
the starting point. Yeah, because I've age 57, I know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes, like I bang something in my leg, and then I don't look at it, and then it's like, oh, it's bleeding. Like, what's
Yeah,
going on?
yeah,
It's like, oh, it's like what I didn't even know. You
right.
didn't feel it. So then that's an example of your body kind of doing what you're saying through that pain management through your subconscious is actually handling it without you thinking about it. Then as soon as you see it, then you're like, oh,
Right.
now I got pain.
Now you're focused on it. And that's what it is. Our brain is constantly determining, what will I focus on? What will I not focus on? If I said, you know, uh, take a breath and focus fully and completely now on the feeling of your shoes on your feet, if you're wearing shoes, right? Um, you could close your eyes and just focus on the feeling of the shoes on your feet, and you would start getting all kinds of input about, the weight, the temperature, how much of my foot is touching here and there, and all that. But all that information is always in your subconscious mind. What's
Hmm,
changed is how much attention you pay to it.
putting the
And-
focus on.
yeah, yeah. And when we have chronic pain, we're telling ourselves a story about that pain. I always encourage people who struggle with chronic pain to reframe the word pain to discomfort,
Mm,
because pain means something different to me than it means to you. Um, but it's always open ended. It's always, the potential is there. It can go to 10 out of 10, right?
mhm.
But if I'm uncomfortable, I can become more comfortable. So that has a range that backs it back down the other way,
Brings it
all the
back
way to
down.
comfortable, right? So it's really fascinating with hypnosis, because the only tools I have are my words and my
Language
voice,
is so
right?
powerful.
And yeah, if you don't have a word and an image, or a word and a sensation, then you can't create a pattern for that thing. And all of those patterns are stored in your subconscious mind. So that's why when I sit with people in my 2 hour sessions, the first hour is me listening and absorbing how that person talks about the problem. Because when I'm doing hypnosis with them, I want absolute flow and continuity in their own mind. The words I use should be the words that they use. So that way, there's nothing for their subconscious mind to catch on and say, wait, what is that? Right?
Mhm.
Because I don't want any of that to potentially uh, cause the subconscious mind to deflect, to put that guard back up and deflect what I've just talked about, suggested, or guided them through.
It sounds like the prompt engineering for your subconscious. 'Cause like
Mm,
everybody's in this AI world. That's a big thing in IT now. It's all about, prompt engineering against these large learning libraries that
right,
we've taught the systems. But it actually goes into understanding language. Like
right,
you have to really start thinking about English grammar and the structure of words and what they actually really mean.
right, right,
What's going to happen when you put these things together? What's the logical outcome?
right.
Is that
And
that's we focus on that a lot in our IT, but it seems like there's some synergy between what you're doing.
yeah, well, with hypnosis, you want to be imprecisely precise, right? Uh, I want to guide you like to a feeling or to a general idea of a thing, but I don't want to define it all for you, because the
Mhm.
more I define it for you, the more likely we are to step outside your capacity to create your own picture that fits in
So
your
you have
mind.
limitation. You don't want to be so
Mhm.
specific. Like
Yeah,
the computer wants it to be very specific
right, right,
because it needs the logic to understand what it is because it doesn't understand the gray.
right,
You got
right.
to give it all case statements like what could happen, what could happen, what could happen.
Yeah, yeah. And so here we want it to be specifically broad enough that your mind will absolutely fill in all of those details itself. Um, and those details that it fills in, if you do this right, are going to be the kind of details that just click for you. It all makes sense for you. If I
Mhm.
said think about an apple, you're thinking about a red apple.
Or
Maybe I'm thinking about a
Granny
green
Smith,
apple.
Granny
But
Smith,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But we're talking about the same thing, right?
Same thing, but it's like everybody has a different vision. It's kinda
Right.
like when you write a song, I have
Mm-hmm.
the initial intention of what my lyrics mean, but then my fans tell me it means something else because now they own it.
Yes.
Now they own
Yes.
it, and I don't own it anymore. Like,
Right.
I wrote it, but now the fans own it.
Right. Right. And that's why it's so powerful, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about, Phantom. That process, the songs music is inherently one of those things that brings us into these hypnotic states. You hear that song on the radio you haven't heard for 20 years, and I'm right
It's
back.
like
I'm
painting.
feeling that feeling of that summer day with my friends or whatever.
It's very cinematic. You know
Yeah.
what? I've always been into this idea, like Hendrix used to talk about sound paintings. Somebody
Hmm.
asked him about Electric Lady, and they said, "Hey, I hear like ocean, and I hear like cosmic. What is that?" And he said, "Well, it's a sound painting."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then people are like, what does that mean?" It's like, well, you can paint sound, you can layer it, and
Yes.
you have this kind of cinematic experience where you have this visual recognition. As soon as you hear that tone, it's like you would get brought to this picture in your brain.
Hmm. Hmm.
And everybody has a different picture based on whatever they hear or what they've
Absolutely.
experienced.
Absolutely. And our brains are association machines. So, I like to create music on the computer. I'm, I'm not a musician by any stretch of the imagination, but I create these kind of soundscapes. And I
Mhm,
have this one particular soundscape that I play in my office. And after the first, so I do a consultation, and then if the person wants to, we can carry on with our sessions. But by the end of the first session, you've been hearing my voice and this particular soundscape for 3 hours. Your
mhm,
brain is associating that sound with my office, with doing hypnosis. And
mhm.
so when they come back for a third session, um, as soon as they sit in the chair, they're already primed
They're
for
brought back to that, yeah.
that suggestion. And I use, in addition to the deeper trance states, I use conversational hypnosis throughout the entire, uh, the paid part of the work. It wouldn't be fair for me to do that during the consultations, but
Mhm.
um, but I do it on the full sessions so that the hypnosis is really starting. We're asking you questions. We're drawing your subconscious mind out and then you into it just through conversation, thinking about problems in different ways that you can't respond using just your conscious mind. And that's a very, very powerful element of how we weave everything together in, well, that's the way I train people to do it. Not everybody does things the way I do.
Mhm.
But in my program, I train people how to weave all of this together so that what we really want is the best outcome for the client in the least number of sessions, right? Because one thing about hypnosis is it's not typically paid for by insurance.
Mhm.
And so, as a hypnotist, I try to be cognizant of the fact that you're paying for this out of pocket. So, let's see how we can move through this efficiently. And the most efficient way is, in my view, this combination of the conversational stuff so that when you get to the part where we're going to go deeper now, get into this situation, this place, um, you're so primed and so ready to just let that thing go, that 45 minutes of hypnosis. And, many, many clients I see, we do get that thing resolved in one session. It's not going to be everybody, but for lots of things, That's the reality. The tools that's what I love about the tools is it removes your reliance on me and me alone and puts you in a position where I'm the one who's reinforcing these new patterns. I'm
So
the
you,
one who's in
so,
control.
well, you get the people get to own like that going forward. They figure out a way to they can like handle the triggers
Right.
by having these new patterns to be employed. But do you ever find that you ever run into like seems like anybody could be hypnotized, but are there certain exceptions where
Mm.
certain types of people can't?
That is a great question, Phantom. I've heard that question so many. I probably hear that question 2 times a week. Um, Everybody is capable of going into hypnotic states. As a matter of fact, hypnotic states are as necessary for living as sleep.
Hmm.
So, yeah, absolutely. If I have somebody in the office for 2 hours, well, usually we're drifting in and out of a light trance state every hour and a half to 2 hours. So, reliably, if you're there for 2 hours, you're in at
You're
least
gonna be in.
some little dip, right? But um, the question is, are you willing? Now, willingness, you might really, really want to let go of that anxiety, but are you willing to trust me to guide you into that state so we can
Trust
do that?
issue.
Because some people are so on guard that it's
You
really
can't let it
hard
go.
for them to,
Yeah,
to
they
even
don't.
do that. And those situations are where the conversational hypnosis is so helpful because, just while we're talking, I'm guiding you into that kind of a state where, you know, your defenses go down. Look, I don't have to be the biggest, toughest guy in the room. Uh, that's always for the other guy in the room, right? I'm just gonna guide you. You don't have
Yeah,
anything to fear for me. I'm going to sit over here on my half of the room. You'll be on your half of the room, and I'll be talking to you. I'll be listening to you. And through that process, I have to build up rapport and trust
yeah.
very, very
Trust is like
quickly.
the big thing, right? A lot of
Hmm.
times people can't get into something without the trust.
Sure, sure.
And so if somebody's got their back up or they got their wall up
Hmm. Hmm.
because like they just are in that kind of state where they never trust anybody. Like
Right.
they've been kind of put in that scenario in their life, and it's a hard place. But given your expertise, you could probably readily identify that and learn like the techniques and how to reduce the defensiveness
Sure.
and work
Well,
past
I tell you, having your doctor tell you to come see me and do this work, that a lot of people are very, very surprised, right? Very surprised to find themselves sitting at a hypnotist office because they thought all of that stuff was like what you see in the movies,
woo-woo.
right?
That
Yeah,
science fiction.
yeah. And so the forward facing part of my practice is very much about there's science to back all of this stuff up,
Hmm.
and that's the way we approach it. For some people, they might not believe, no matter how many times I tell them, that the origin of this problem could be resolved working just in this current life. They need to go into a past life to work on resolving this. Well, that's okay. If there's a therapeutic reason to do that, we'll do that. If there's a therapeutic reason to look at some other episode in this life, we'll do that. This is all about what's good for the client. But when uh, when you go to the website, I don't advertise all these other things that are potentially there because um, I'm really wanting to help people understand that there are a lot of medical and um, mental health benefits to doing hypnosis. And, for some people, if you say past life regressions or whatever, they're going to immediately, uh-oh, I'm
Yeah,
out of here, right?
yeah. It's too
Uh,
too too much food.
yeah, yeah. But, you know, that's the thing about being a well-rounded hypnotist, right? And I never am pushing my perspective
One
on,
thing over the other.
listening. Your clients are always going to be your greatest teachers. So I listen and I respond to where you are. Hypnosis, perhaps more than some other modalities, you got to meet that person right where they are. So there have been some times when we needed to do a few sessions of just conversational hypnosis to get that person to the point
Yeah.
where we
Totally.
can do the deeper stuff. But
You do it
what
well.
I hear over and over again from those clients is, gosh, I feel like I've done 5 talk therapy sessions. I got so much stuff out from, but that's just because we're not just talking. Because when you're just talking, the guard is up.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
we're talking, that guard goes down, and that opens up a whole range of
There's a whole new
possibilities.
way to how to solve these issues. And
Yeah.
I do want to mention, like where we hit the hour mark, we always hit it faster
Oh gosh, yeah.
than we ever imagined. But if somebody clicks on summithypnosisnw.com, is that how they book with you? That's how they connect with you?
Yeah, that will get them in and get the ball rolling. I also have a Summit Hypnosis Instagram, and that's where some of my soundscapes are up there with some
Cool.
kaleidoscopic images and some reinforcing powerful quotes. So if people are interested in any of that, they can access all of it through that main link.
We will create a story for this episode with a clip and mention your Instagram.
Okay, perfect.
Username,
I
so
appreciate that.
that will connect there. I do appreciate the time you spent with us today and to dive into hypnosis. And that's as a therapy. And I do appreciate you being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. It's been a really illuminating, and I don't think I've ever gotten into this topic in this particular at this depth before. So I'm very appreciative of what we were able to talk about today.
Well, Phantom, I appreciate so much you allowing me to come on the show and have this conversation with you. It means a lot to me. All right. Take care.
Good rest of the day.
Good. Bye-bye.